Thank you, Peter. If you read productivity experts, you will find that there's no end of tools and strategies and habits and systems to make you more productive. Some examples. There's the inbox zero method, the getting things done method, SMART goals, the Pomodoro time blocking method, calendar blocking, the 1-3-5 method, the Eisenhower decision matrix, and the good old to-do list. There are digital tools which promise to make productivity a breeze. Google Workspace, Trello, Asana, Slack. Some of you may have heard of these, some of you may even use them. But there's one thing which, if you don't have it, none of those really will help you. And if you do have it, well, you probably don't need a productivity tool at all. That thing is motivation. The desire to put your plans into practice and the drive to keep doing it. Motivation trumps them all. As we near the end of the book of Hebrews, the author wants this church that he's writing to have motivation, not for productivity, but motivation for worship, motivation to keep following God. Their motivation to stick with God, it was in danger, and they needed a boost. But not all motivation is the same. Not just any motivation will do. The source of our motivation matters. Take study for an example. What motivations are there to study? Or maybe getting good grades, maybe getting a job, maybe making your parents happy. Sometimes there are unhelpful motivations, like wanting to prove you're better than someone else. And some motivations will sustain you longer and better through study. I mean, the ultimate motivation in study is caring about what you're studying, wanting to know it, wanting to be able to do your best at it. Our passage from Hebrews 12 presents two different sources of motivation for worship, for following God. And as we've been hearing already, each one is symbolised by a mountain. The first is Mount Sinai. I'd love it, Scott, if you could find a picture of Mount Sinai and put it up there. That's some research for next time. I don't think anyone knows where it is. Anyway, the first one is Mount Sinai, where God gave the Israelites the law after freeing them from slavery in Egypt. It's not named in the passage, but it's clearly alluded to. Listen to this portion of the original Mount Sinai account back in Exodus 19. And just think about how it resonates with what was in Hebrews. On the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning, with a thick cloud over the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. As the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. These are the details the author of Hebrews picks up on. The fire, the darkness, the gloom and storm, the mountain trembling violently at the sound, the trumpet blast, the voice of God speaking. We often think of God's appearance and the giving of the Ten Commandments as a pinnacle of God's dealings with his people. And it was. But for those who were there, it wasn't comforting or joyful or uplifting. It was terrifying. Why? Why was it like this? Why would God appear to them in this way, especially when we have such a contrast later on in the passage? The only way we can make sense of it is if we grasp God's holiness. God, who is without beginning or end, God who has the power to bring the world into existence with a word, and God in whom all things hold together. God who is light, in whom there is no darkness at all. God who says, "Be holy, for I am holy." We are created. God is the creator. We are small and powerless. God is almighty. We are sinful. God is pure and perfect. This, Mount Sinai, wasn't even an act of judgment from God. It was an act of grace. It allowed God's people to hear him and relate to him and be taught by him and be in covenant with him. It was good for them to be there, and yet the sight was so terrifying that Moses said, "I'm trembling with fear." All this means that when we encounter God, by rights, it should be a fearful experience. Even if it's a good fear, like the fear I imagine that you would have climbing Mount Everest. Even if you're not someone who pays attention to warning signs in life, I reckon if you're climbing Mount Everest and saw a warning sign, you'd respect that sign. God is so much holier than we can comprehend. And so the first mountain, the first motivation presented in this passage is characterized by fear. But the point, as it says in verse 18, is that you have not come to a mountain that can be touched and that's burning with fire. All that sensory overwhelm, the warning not to touch the mountain lest you die, that was the Israelites' experience in Moses' day, but it is not your experience now. You have come to a different mountain. Symbolically, Mount Zion, the name of the hill that Jerusalem was built on. I was actually surprised at how tall it is. I've always understood that it's not an impressive looking mountain, but it's because of its significance in the history of God's people. It became known through the scriptures as God's holy mountain. Well, how can the author say you've come to this mountain when we clearly are not in Jerusalem? It's because it's not the physical place we've come to, but it's what it represents. As he says in verse 22 onwards, you've come to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. We don't come there physically, we come there spiritually. You've come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly. There are the angels mentioned back at the start of the letter of Hebrews. And there is joy not present at Mount Sinai. You've come to the church of the firstborn, that is the whole church, the inheritors of God's kingdom, whose names are written in heaven. No longer fearful, worrying about whether we'll make it there, our names are written in heaven. You've come to God, the judge of all. We might read this mention of God as judge as kind of a somber intrusion, a reminder of sin and judgment in a list of otherwise happy things. But interestingly, as I was preparing this week, an African Bible commentary I was reading on this sees this as saying, well, the city of the living God is that where God is judge is a place of just and good government, so lacking on earth. If we think of God being judge only as a negative idea, maybe that's more about our experience than what the text is saying. It's good that we've come to God, the judge of all. You've come to the spirits of the righteous made perfect. Under the Old Covenant, there are instructions about how people could be ritually clean, externally clean. But at this mountain, our spirits will be righteous and perfect internally. And the blessings of this heavenly Jerusalem are permanent. In verse 26, the author picks up on the thunder and the voice of God shaking the earth at Sinai. At that time, his voice shook the earth, but now he has promised, once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. And he's quoting there from Haggai, the prophet, chapter 2, seeing a link in that key phrase, shaking the earth. Interestingly, in Haggai 2, fear is a topic again, but God says, do not fear. Through Haggai, God was calling the Israelites returning from exile to rebuild the ruined city and the temple. And God promises to shake the heavens and the earth, the sea and the dry land and the nations, and to fill the new temple with glory. It's almost a picture of things being shaken out and pouring into the temple and to grant them peace. And in the translation used in the first century, there's a strong emphasis on this happening once more, for the last time, which is highlighted in verse 27. The words "once more" indicate the removing of what can be shaken, that is, created things, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. The image is like gold panning. You shake the pan and the lighter, temporary things, they wash away, leaving only what's heavier and valuable and permanent. So this is the second mountain, the second motivation. Heavenly, joyful, a place of belonging and perfection, permanent, unshakable. Such a contrast to Mount Sinai. How has this happened? What's the difference between the first mountain and this last mountain? The answer is in verse 24. You have come to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. The first mountain was under the old covenant, mediated by Moses, and those instructions about not approaching the mountain, they were typical of that covenant. It enabled you to approach God, but only temporarily, only with sacrifices of purification. And there was always fear about whether you got it right, whether you'd be acceptable. But Jesus mediates a new covenant that fulfills everything in the old one. We can come to Mount Zion without fear because of his sprinkled blood shed on the cross, which purifies us. Jesus himself is the difference that makes such a contrast between these two mountains. He's the difference between Christianity and every other religion or belief system or spirituality there is. Many belief systems say that they point the way to God, and they provide teaching and methods and instruction, and then they say, now go. You must do it. You must ascend the mountain. But what if you can't? What if the reality is that, like Mount Sinai, we can't perfect ourselves, we can't approach a holy God? Yet other belief systems, ones which may be less of the traditional or formal religions, but are becoming more popular today, they promise spirituality without cost, without effort. You want to commune with God? You don't need perfection or anything like that. You can come and go as you please. There's no barrier between you and God. But what if there is? What if the Creator is light, in whom there is no darkness at all? Every belief system or religion that simply gives instructions on how you can get to God, it's like the first mountain. The motivation for worshipping is, I'd better worship the right way, or God won't accept me. It's a motivation of fear. Some people think of Christianity like that picture of Mount Sinai, the Old Covenant. There, the motivation is that you approach God only if you're purified, only if you obey the rules. And one misstep leads to fear of the consequences. Many people, sadly, have got this understanding of Christianity, whether it's through their schooling or, for some people, what they might describe as a strict religious upbringing. And this is something that parents and people doing kids ministry need to be aware of. Often I think because kids are kids, we spend so much time in our lives doing what we have to do, managing behaviour, implementing discipline. We need to make sure that when we're teaching the way of Jesus, they are hearing the gospel of grace, and that they know that the way we live comes, as Hebrews says, from thankfulness, with reverence and awe at what Jesus has done for us, not out of fear that we will be acceptable. Amongst every belief system in the world, Christianity offers something unique. Because on the one hand, it doesn't pretend that we can just walk up to God. God's holy character hasn't changed from the old covenant to the new. That's why the passage finishes reminding us our God is a consuming fire. He is holy, and we are not worthy on our own to approach him. But on the other hand, despite affirming that God is holy, Christianity doesn't give an impossible solution saying, get yourself holy and then you can approach God. In Christianity, Jesus has descended the mountain for us and sprinkled us with his blood. We don't make the way, he has made the way. We don't come to him, he comes to us. When we're sprinkled with Christ's blood, we're purified and free to worship in prayer, together as a church, and in service with our whole lives. He brings us to the heavenly Jerusalem, to the angels, the church of the firstborn, to God the righteous judge, to our names written in heaven. The sheer wonder of the grace given to us, says Hebrews, that sheer wonder should be our motivation to worship. The message for us is let this motivate us. Verse 25. See to it that you do not refuse him who speaks. If they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, how much less will we, if we turn away from him who warns us from heaven? It's like one of those game shows when a contestant has just answered the right question and won $100,000 or something. But then, as game shows like to do, they're offered the chance to win 5 times as much. Will they take it or will they walk away? Jesus has given us everything. There is no more. If we walk away from this, well, there's no third mountain. So don't refuse, but listen and appreciate it and take what he gives us. As it says at the end, since we're receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe. Worship, not just as in prayer or singing, but directing our whole lives into God's service. Stay motivated to do this with the right motivation, not with fear, nor with a flippant lack of fear, but with reverence and awe, amazement that we are on this mountain at all. Let's pray to that end. Our gracious God, you are holy, a consuming fire. We thank you for Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and for his sprinkled blood, which brings us to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. We come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly. We come to the church of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. We come to you, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect. Motivate us with the glory of this place. Help us listen. Make us thankful. Help us worship you acceptably with reverence and awe.